give those communities just hope, just a little bit of hope. Clean grass. Clean grass forever changed my life. I wanted to know, how does that grass look so clean? He mows it a certain way. Wow, all in one direction, really? In a box, in a square. I became the best lawnmower in the world. $10. I mow your whole yard. I don't care how big it is. And every kid has that same dream. But the options are, I can sell drugs really quickly. I can turn into a gang member really quickly. Why? Gang members feed me. They put a roof over my head. And they protect me. The only thing I would ever say about gang life is, the only difference of gang life and Fortune 500 companies is they're selling the wrong product. Because everything else runs structurally the same way. For me, it was like, now to see the disasters in our communities, no, that's not a choice. That's a duty. And we don't follow that duty, right? You go in every community. You take Martin Luther King Street. You go in every community. It's in the worst parts of the city. And so years ago, man, when I started my foundation, then I started to realize, Brandon, that foundation is great. It really is. I mean, it does a lot of great things. You know, you feed a lot of people. You bless a lot of people every year. You have your big foundation events. And if you really want to do something, you got to give them much more than just a few days of it. You got to feed them. You got to house them. You got to educate them. And biggest thing you got to do, you got to mentor them. You got to teach them. They don't know. Like, a lot of athletes that came from these types of neighborhoods, I guarantee you, has my exact same story. Because I've talked to most of them. Same story. So what made me different? I think my faith overrode everything. I was crazy enough to trust that God was so real when I had absolutely nothing. So then I said, if I can teach that. So I started practicing that. But I stuttered really bad. So people didn't like to hear from me. And then I started to go through other things to figure out a way to beat my stuttering. So when I started watching television, I would recite when somebody speaks. I would get close enough to the television. My mom would say, get away from that television, you're going to go blind. And I used to sit in front of the television, I used to just repeat words. She said, don't do it. And I used to just flow, because I always thought, no, right? And all of these stories of triumph or trials, that's the only reason I'm starting this other thing that I'm starting, right? That we've been talking about. My other show, For the Two Cars, because everybody got a Dick of Car story. Of when they didn't have it. These communities, the only reason people don't invest in these communities is because they're afraid to go in these communities. I'm not. I'm from there. There's nothing that the streets can teach, nothing that I haven't lived. And that's why the passion for me to go back and build IOA, Imagination, Opportunity, Access. Because if you give them that, everybody won't do it, but the right ones will.
Yeah, I mean, and what drives you is you lay awake at night thinking about all those little boys that somebody needs to show up and try to convince mom and be willing to invest a little bit into, and it could change their whole life forever.
I wish I could show you my phone right now. This young kid, he won't mind, but this young kid, Chase, right before my son passed, he called me. He got in touch with me. His mom and his father had killed himself, committed suicide in his house, and Chase is this 13-year kid, so incredible, and he was like, my daddy's gone, my father's gone. Mr. Lewis, I don't know what to do. And I said, look, I can't replace a father, but I can be daddy. And every day of my life, Chase texts me every day. But Chase is the same story of hundreds, just like Pedro. Pedro, my son, in LA. Pedro, parents gave him up when he was 13 years old. He lived in a friend closet for the next 10 years. We met at a hotel in LA. And he just ran up to me. He says, "Your videos changed my life." I said, "Really?" He said, "Yeah, because you didn't give up." He says, "I changed gang life." The next thing he said, "Would you be my father?" I can never replace a father, but I'll be your daddy. And now, that son spent this past Christmas with me. That son shares these intimate things that these kids, a lot of them are like that, B. There are so many, man, that they're just surviving. They're in survival mode. That's why game like.
All right, we listening to Ray Lewis. Shout out to Brandon Dawson podcast. Y'all go check him out. Ray Lewis is just talking about his struggle growing up, talking about how football became his savior, basically. Um, you know, I'm he didn't say where he grew up at, but I'm sure from the places he talking about is Texas somewhere. It's somewhere down south, and he very poor, and um, he said he used to watch. I guess I don't know different places they call it Pop Warner, Little League, whatever. So he's sitting there as a shorty watching the Little League football team, and I guess he saw, I guess his friends or peers playing, and he wish he could play. And talking with friends, you know, I guess they went back to the coach and said, "Look, Ray want to play." So the coach saw he had a little size on him. I guess this is what I'm interpreting. Just from hearing him talk, uh, he had a little size on him. And I don't know how early on this was, but let's say 10 years old. So 10 you got a little size on you, And for football, that's great. That means you could be a lineman. So he ended up being one of the greatest linebackers ever. So, you know, the coach went to his mother's house and asked, could he play on the team? And to play on the team was $15 that he said, my mother don't have $15. My mother, she just make enough money to pay our bills and keep food in the house. So I guess she was a single mother. He said he didn't meet his dad till 33, until he was 33. And his dad was a wrestler in high school and broke all the records. So he said in high school, he started wrestling and he had a lot of animosity for his dad because he wasn't around and mom was struggling and everything. He said, yeah, I vowed to break all his records and I did. So when you look in the history books and you see the wrestling records, I broke all the records that my father had. So that sounds like the Jalen Rose story. His dad was an NBA player back in the day, and in the days when 22,000 was a lot of money, like, which is no money now. but that was a lot of money in the 70s and 60s. And Jalen Rose's dad went to Providence University, Providence, Rhode Island, and set records and whatnot. And somebody pulled his coattail and said, you know, your dad was a great player at Rhode Island, made it to the NBA. So he like, that's great, but I don't know him. He didn't acknowledge me as one of his children. So it created a real animosity. So it made him go hard to want to become an NBA player and make it and surpass his dad and make him realize you made a mistake turning your back on me because of look at where I'm at now. That was his dream. And then he wanted to wear his dad number and flip the number around. You know, as I think of that, the show Ballers with the Rock, Denzel Washington's son, you know, I forget his name, but David Washington, that's his name. And Denzel Washington's son plays a football player who dad abandoned him, who was a NBA, no, an NFL football player. And when he made it to the league, he got his dad jersey, say like 87, but then told him I want to wear 78. So that was the say, fuck you, dad, you know, and I'm gonna be a better NFL player than you. So that drive was like strong to, you know. So I tell people when I have conversations, and I have a lot of conversations with a lot of folks, and uh, everybody that makes it, that do historic things, it's always coming from a place of a personal situation. Like many of us coming from the hood that do well, that get out, that shoot to the stratosphere and become world famous because of their athletic ability or whatever artistry that they pursue, and they tap into it and be great. It comes from a place of somewhere, and it comes from some kind of reason that I did this. I just didn't wake up and say I wanted to be great, but it started somewhere small and it snowballed. You know what I'm saying? So, like he just said,